Eagles Entertainment.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got another loaded episode for you today as we're going to kick things off with Draft Buzz, where Ben Fennell, Dane Brugler, and I are going to break down the top linebackers in the NFL Draft this spring and names you need to know at that position. Plus, it's about that time. Pro days are starting to get underway. We're seeing some test scores leak out from some of the private workouts as well over at these athletic training centers. But who are the names that aren't going to impress, when it comes to the shorts and t-shirt, but are still going to become quality NFL players? We're going to talk about that with these guys as well before we transition to On the Clock, where the three of us once again go through the exercise of playing the role of teams in draft rooms across the league. This week, we'll be making picks selected by random draw for the New Orleans Saints, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we'll cover some names that you need to hear in some mock drafts. And speaking of mock drafts, we're going to cover some names you need to know for the Cleveland Browns in the blueprint, where I catch up with Brent Sobleski, who knows this Browns team inside and out and provides us with some insight into their thought process and how they approach the act of team building, especially when it comes to the NFL Draft. Then we'll wrap things up with Draft Mailbag. We've got a couple of questions from you at home that I want to make sure we get to. We're going to talk some receivers, some no-brainer selections in the top half of the draft, and even break down a mock draft from you at home as well to wrap the show. Before we get there, though, just a quick reminder to jump onto our Apple Podcast page, because that is the best way to jump on and reach our draft mailbag. So if you go on, you leave us a player ranking, a mock draft, a question about a specific prospect, whatever it is, team fits for whatever team that you follow, you can go on to our Apple Podcast page, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Not only will you get your question answered, but you'll also do us a favor by boosting us up the rankings a little bit and getting this podcast a little bit more visible to others looking for NFL draft content. Thanks so much to everybody who has done that as of late. That being said, let's get this show rolling. It's time to kick things off with Ben Fennell and Dane Brugler in Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, time to get things going here as I welcome in Ben Fennell and Dane Brugler. Guys, pro day time's starting to kind of come out. We haven't had any official school pro days outside of Trevor Lawrence's, but we're starting to get some of these more private pro days, from the combine training centers, and some of these times are starting to kind of leak out. And so that kind of got my brain going and thinking, one discussion we have almost every single year leading up to the combine and coming out of it are who are the players that maybe we don't expect to test well or didn't test well, that we say, all right, look, even though they didn't test like a, Mr. Universe athlete, we still expect them to be good football players. And I'll kind of get things going just to kind of get the gearing for you guys. To me, a good example of this, and it's ironic enough because we've already seen one of these kind of like loopy times that get leaked out with this player, but Rashad Bateman, the wide receiver from Minnesota. Now, watching Bateman on film over the last couple of years, I have not seen a guy that I would say is a super explosive, A+ athlete. I don't look at him and say that's his game. So if Rashad Bateman runs in the 4.55s, and his 3-cone is just okay, and the jumps are just okay, that's not moving the needle for me to the point where I'm like, oh man, like I got to drop him down the board. Now with the caveat, apparently he's like timed in the 4.39s or something like that. We'll see what that looks like, at the pro day when it actually happens. But Rashad Bateman is a player for me that kind of fits that bill. And I guess that's kind of where I'm getting at, guys, is like, if a guy doesn't test well and it doesn't move the needle, he kind of fits this discussion, right? I don't know if that makes sense. Ben, who would be a guy for you that kind of fits that kind of label?
Well, I think right in this same category of receiver, a guy that will not be a high-end explosive tester, whether it's the broad and the vert explosive lower body stuff, straight line speed, or even change of direction. And that's Tylan Wallace.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean he's a poor receiver. I think he has incredible production. I think he's very strong at the catch point. I think he's a much better receiving prospect than his kind of general scouting reports allude to because of that. He ran 4.58 coming out of high school. He's not going to be slower than that. He might just be a 4.55 guy, maybe 4.51, but that's okay. And I think, you look at his tape and you look at a guy that wins with contested catches so often, you wonder, why are they always contested? Why is he not running past anybody? And I think there's a little bit of offensive scheme that works into that and how they use him in that offense. So he's a guy I'm not expecting to test, particularly well, but don't overthink his tape and his production and experience. He's a good player.
I think that's a great example of somebody who fits that category. Dane, is there a guy for you that kind of fits this bill?
Well, I mean, Patrick Surtain. I mean, does that?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one.
A corner. I mean, there's no other position that is more stopwatch dependent, or people, scouts especially, care more about the stopwatch than corner. But Patrick Surtain, he's not a blazer. That's not the strength of his game. And I'm not even sure, with some of the other drills too, because he's not the most twitchy cornerback either. He's assignment sound. He's not a bad athlete by any means. But he's so comfortable with his technique. He doesn't panic out there. He understands how to, the dance of playing the position. So even if he's going to run, say he runs a 4.52, like that, I'm not going to think any less of him as a corner, just because he doesn't have the blazing 40 time.
We had Eric Crocker on late last week, and we talked about it, and I compared Surtain to Tre'Davious White, and White was kind of the same kind of deal, where, what was he, high 4.4s, low 4.5s coming out of LSU, and that didn't change my opinion of him whatsoever when he was coming out, and I think that would be a similar one. I'll stay on defense for my second guy. I'm going to go with Wake Forest pass rusher Boogie Basham, a guy that wins with his size and his power, his ability to push the pocket. He's versatile. He's got a nonstop motor, but I'll tell you what, I'm not expecting the superhero 3-cone from him, right? I feel like that would be a test that everybody kind of puts up when you look at pass rushers. I'm not expecting him to test that way. So if he doesn't perform the best, that's not going to affect my opinion of Carlos Basham. Ben, give us your second and final one.
Yeah, I'll stay on the defensive side with you here. And let's go with a safety prospect that I think is one of the more well-rounded safeties, but isn't going to be an elite tester. And that's Richie Grant at UCF, Central Florida, that I think is a good back-end player, matchup player, run support player. But we get so excited about our safeties being these explosive linear athletes, whether it's Jamal Adams or the freak shows of Derwin James. He's not any of those types. He's not a blazer. He's not an explosive type. He's a tough guy with really good nuance and instincts and ball skills. So I think there's different ways to be a productive elite safety. And it's just a little different than the profiles of safeties we get excited about.
I feel like this, safety, we talked a little bit about that last week, and we're going to talk about linebackers today. The height, weight, speed element, I'm almost saying I'd rather have the guy that's the opposite, where, and that's why I love Richie Grant, is that, he's not the check the box height, weight, speed athlete, but he's instinctive. He's tough. He's got ball skills, and you start getting all the other boxes checked. Dane, who's our last one here?
I think Elijah Molden fits in this too.
Great.
Sticking with another corner, there's some question about, okay, is he a safety? Is he a corner? Is he a nickel corner only? What's his versatility at the next level? And a lot of people are going to look at his testing times and base their projection off of that. But all I know is he's a good football player. I mean, this guy, even though he might not have the best 40, and I'm not even sure what he's going to run. I mean, he could run a 4.48. He could run a 4.58, and I wouldn't be surprised at either of those.
Yep.
Because sometimes he looks quicker than others, and but I know how quickly he processes things. He's quick to read pass run. He stays coordinated in his movements. He's got a closing burst when the ball's in the air to go make a play. So even though he doesn't have that elite twitch that you're looking for at the position, this guy, his competitive nature, his instincts, his read react skills are all off the charts as a football player. And I'm not sure that's going to show in the testing, but I know it shows on tape.
And a really fun exercise, Fran, for maybe next week, some guys that are going to test out of this world that maybe their tape doesn't match that, and kind of go the other way with the perspective. And there's going to be some guys with some elite track speed through these pro days that their tape may not excite you. So it's going to be kind of another conversation as well.
Yeah, I feel like it's such an interesting kind of angle to look at the testing and how that kind of impacts the rest of the evaluation. Guys, before we get into these top linebackers, we always go through our film room recap where we each talk about a player that we've studied over the last week and put a lot of time into. Ben, I'll let you kick things off for us this week.
All right, two really fast ones. Just a little shout out to Torrey Carter, fullback tight end at LSU, absolute snot bubbler. He just loves getting after people. He's right up there with Ben Mason and Tommy Tremble as far as being one of my favorite blocking type of prospects. But I want to touch on Josh Johnson, from the University of Louisiana, Monroe. That's right, UL Monroe. It was initially an Ole Miss commit coming out of high school, ended up going JUCO. So he was a guy the SEC was all over. Got a little bit big at JUCO, got up to 230 pounds, had some off the field stuff, but has since shaved weight and is feeling good and is playing some of the best ball of his life. He's about 5'9", 215 pounds. For a good profile comparison, very similar to Michael Carter at North Carolina. Squatty frame, tough kid, really, really productive player. Runs hard, blasts through arm tackles, quick cuts, balance, finishes runs, has burst to take away angles and to surge through the hole. Doesn't really have the home run speed, though. But in 2019, Josh Johnson had 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns. A very productive player. 4 running backs in college football. Had 200 carries, so a high-volume player, with a 6.0 average. So you're getting good results, yet you're a high-volume carry. 4 guys in college football hit that. Travis Etienne, Kenneth Gainwell, Chuba Hubbard, and Josh Johnson. That's pretty good company right there of running backs. So he's a guy that I think is a little bit behind the 8 ball as far as buzz and draft stock, considering playing at UL Monroe. It just is what it is. But I was very happy to see his name on the Combine invite list.
I love it. Yeah, certainly a name to keep an eye on there.
Well, Ben, because I did him over the summer, and I liked what I saw, but I noticed his yards per carry average was cut like almost in half this year. Did you notice anything between his 2019 stuff and 2020 stuff that was, any different? Was it, blocking or, not as enough room for him to create? I mean, did you notice anything between the 2 years that, for such a dip in his production?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't hard to see the lack of production. It wasn't as exciting. I think the offensive line took a hit or two with graduates and opt-outs. So the offense was just a little bit of a patchwork and kind of a shell of what it was. But I just don't think 2020, they entered that season kind of with a full deck. And there's a bunch of teams around college football that had that situation and kind of scrambled to put together some rosters. So I'm going to kind of give him the benefit of the doubt and hope his tape in 2019 is more of the true prospect that he is.
So I'm going to take us into the trenches here with mine. And a guy that I got a chance to watch recently was Kendrick Green, the redshirt junior who declared for the draft out of Illinois, the first offensive player from Illinois to be named first team all Big Ten since 2011. And that was AJ Jenkins, the wide receiver, who was the first round pick for the San Francisco 49ers. I think when you look at Kendrick Green, all right, and when I'm evaluating interior offensive linemen, and really I would say the same thing about defensive linemen as well. Number one, do you have the requisite size? Yeah, check. He's 6'4", 315, something in that range. Requisite athleticism? Yeah, this guy is really fluid. He gets out of his stance well. He's good on the move, good puller. He can reach. He can make any block in the playbook. Can you win with power? Yes, the guy's got pop on contact. He can move people, whether it's in a phone booth or out in space. Can you win with strength? He's got a 2-step anchor. He does not get overwhelmed by bull rushes. He can hold the integrity of the pocket. And then can you win with technique? And I think again, across the board, I'm looking Kendrick Green from Illinois, athleticism, strength, power, technique. He's a finisher's mentality, former defensive player that made the jump over to offensive line. So has only been playing full-time on offense for 3 years. Reason to believe that his best football is ahead of him. This guy was really, really impressive. I was really blown away by his film. I was going to talk about another guy, Greg Newsome, the corner from Northwestern, who a lot of people feel could be a first-round pick. I was more impressed watching Green's tape than I was with Newsome, and that's not even a knock against Newsome. I just thought Green was that impressive, man.
We don't do this too often. Fran, call your shot. Is Green making it out of day 2?
No, there's no way that guy's a day 3 pick. I would be shocked if that guy's a day 3 pick.
All right, we got the receipts.
Dane, what are you thinking there?
Well, it's funny because I had the same reaction when I got done with Green. And so I texted around just to see how scouts were feeling about him.
Okay.
And I think I reached out to 4 people. 3 of them said 4th round, 1 said 3rd. So it was just interesting to see where they had him. He is really good. I mean, I agree with everything you said. Did you like him as a center or a guard?
I watched 2 games of him as a guard and 1 as a center. I thought he could do both. I did love him at guard. And so, I'd say it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. I think he could do either. And that certainly presents, that boosts his value a little bit as well.
I love those situations where you watch a guy and you're like, am I seeing this right? This guy is awesome. You have to text some of your scout friends and things, as opposed to the other way when there's guys getting buzzed. You watch their tape and you're like looking around. this guy stinks. Why am I watching this guy?
Do you guys feel like you get more react? Like I texted 2 people after I watched Green, and I'm not as popular as Dane, so I didn't get a text back from either of my guys. But like, I feel like I get more reaction when I'm like, guys, I'm not seeing what everybody else is seeing with this guy, as opposed to the situation with Green this morning.
A little bit of that confirmation bias.
It usually happens, like what Ben was saying, where you're like, what are people talking? I don't get it. But it's really refreshing when you find a Kendrick Green where you're like, why is nobody talking about this guy? This guy's awesome.
You're sitting in the room by yourself. You're looking over to your dog. You're like, am I seeing this? Get over here. Come watch this rep.
I don't know that he's going to be, the best fit for every scheme. I think, he's obviously for a zone blocking scheme, he's going to be a better fit, but he's a lot of fun. And, you look at his background, he's got a really athletic background. He was, he had a big time wrestler, I believe, or baseball, wrestling. He had a total of 12 varsity letters in high school. So 4-year player, football, baseball, wrestling, and just a really talented guy. He started 4 games at center over his career. Yep. And there's a lot to like about this player. I think he's, when I came out with my rankings last week, he was my 4th rated center. So Creed Humphrey, Miners, Josh Myers, Kendrick Green were my top 4. So, and all 4 graded out as top 100 guys for me.
Well, I was gonna say, well, you hate them, so we can move on down to the next player. Dane, wrap us up here.
Who was I going to talk about? You got my mind working. Israel Mukuamu. Yeah. I felt like he got so much pub, so much attention when he had those 3 picks against Jake Fromm. And then, that was in 2019.
Yep.
And then, working on him over the summer, looking at him, I was like, okay, well, JC Horn, he's really the dude in that secondary. And then, finished his eval this week. And I still don't know what to do with him. He's basically a traits-based prospect. He's his size, his length, he's got ball skills. He's a pretty flexible mover, but the false steps are everywhere. He's so raw and leggy that long gait really delays his redirect. He bites on every little movement the wide receiver throws at him. Is he a better safety or press man corner? He's just a tough guy to figure out. It's really hard to love him as a player. The traits are intriguing, but I don't know. It's hard to see this guy being drafted in the top, 5 rounds. He looks like a later round traits guy to me.
Interesting. Yeah. And I know he's played, I think he got 1 start at safety in 19, and he played some more safety this year, right?
3 at free safety, 2 at corner. So he actually had more starts at safety than corner.
Got it. All right. Interesting.
Kind of reminds me a little bit of Josh Harvey Clements, like that style of prospect, just being a little bit awkward size to be a defensive back, kind of a trait-based guy that you just don't know where to play him.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's get now, guys, to the linebacker preview. A bunch of interesting players to break down at this position. And like what we talked about last week with safeties, guys that are different body types and skill sets, and really depending on the scheme that you deploy, you're going to see all these guys differently. So we put together a bunch of different superlatives, and we'll go through guys on day 1, day 2, and day 3 that you need to know at home. We'll start things off with most instinctive, and I'll kick things off here with a day 1 or day 2 selection. And I'm going to go with Nick Bolton. And I know that, there's a lot of guys that are going to get talked about, whether it's Zaven Collins and Micah Parsons or Owusu Koromoa. We can go down the list. There's a bunch of guys. I think that Nick Bolton, not only is he an explosive, violent player, I've made the comparison to Devin Bush in the past, a former top 15 pick out of Michigan, now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think Bolton presents that, but he sees things so fast that he's got such a quick trigger, and then his ability to close and finish really, really pops off the tape. And I think his eyes and his mental processing allow him to play even faster. I can't wait to see how he times and see if he matches that Devin Bush test profile. But Bolton is a guy that really, really stands out to me. Dane, day 1, day 2, another guy that you would vote for most instinctive?
I'm going to go with Jamin Davis, the linebacker out of Kentucky. I think that with the way how patient he is, how decisive he is, the way he can read his keys, quickly react. He keeps false steps to a minimum. Really like his vision, his block recognition. That really helps him stay ahead of plays. And then what he can do in coverage, he shows a really great feel within his zone drops. His ability to process quickly, trust what he sees and goes, it really helps him be productive.
Ben, round us out here. Give us a guy on day 3 that you find to just be really instinctive.
Well, day 3 is kind of tough because if you're this instinctive, you should probably be a higher drafted prospect. So this is going to be somebody that may lack a little bit of some testing and some explosiveness. Yep. I'm going to kind of go with an off the beat one here, and that's Pete Werner at Ohio State, which I think is a little bit in the forgotten category as far as linebacking prospects. Not a whole lot to be excited about as far as freak athlete or explosive or playmaker. This guy is just a really tough, good, well-rounded football player, great play ID, good snap anticipation, good route concept anticipation, good in coverage. He's an athletic player, really tough, violent, nasty. He's a guy I just think is kind of forgotten about, and I really love his just natural instincts just through his experience at Ohio State.
No, that's a good point there that you bring up in terms of when you get to day 3, especially at this position, if you're looking at one thing, you're most likely going to be lacking elsewhere. You're not going to get a lot of well-rounded players that fall to day 3 at this position. Let's go now to the best third down value. And I left this at third down value because we could be talking about pass rush. We could be talking about pass coverage. I'm going to go with a guy that's a day 1 or day 2 pick that I think has the potential to be impactful in both areas. And that's Zaven Collins from Tulsa. Big enough at 6'4", 260 that I believe that there are going to be teams out there that view him as an edge rusher, but he's got a really natural ability to play in space as well. He's made some huge interceptions in coverage this past year as a rat player underneath, where he's just reading the quarterback and getting into throwing lanes and showing the ability to finish and take it back to the house. I think when you see his ability to play in coverage, but then also get after it as a straight pass rusher or as a blitzer from the second level, yeah, Zaven Collins, I mean, that's what's going to excite people is that versatility. So he would be my pick for best third down value on day 1 or day 2. Ben, who would fit the bill for you on the first couple days of the draft?
Yeah, it's a great pick there. I'm going to go with Chaz Surratt out of North Carolina. And he just seems like he's, ready-made to play third down in the NFL. He's a great blitzer. He's good at QB spy, obviously savvy in underneath zones, good in man match against some against some tight ends and running backs. But he's a guy that can drop in some deep Tampa 2 holes. He can turn and run in the seam with some tight ends. Seems like all those boxes you need checked for a third down role for an off-the-ball linebacker Chaz Surratt is bringing with him.
He can do so. He's got the ability to do so much. He's only been playing defense full time for 2 seasons. A great blitzer right now, and then a high upside coverage player as well. Dane, who would be a guy on day 3 that you feel has the best third down value?
Obviously, this player, so much depends on the medicals. But Justin Hilliard from Ohio State, watching him against, later in the year, whether it's against Northwestern or Clemson. He's got the twitch that you want, where he can drop in space, he can cover. There's a lot of ability here talent's not the question. It just comes down to the medicals. So as long as the doctors sign off, I'm feeling great about getting Justin Hilliard in, the 6th round. And, as long as he can play out his rookie contract, then I'm going to feel really good about the value I'm getting with what he can offer on third downs.
Kind of surprised we didn't find a spot for Jabril Cox in this category here, being the third down value, considering how savvy he is in space and in coverage. And
I got an excuse. You two don't, because he's a day 1 or day 2 player. So
there you go. Okay.
And not to mention too, he was a great blitzer in Mobile. I thought he did a great job in one-on-ones down there at the Senior Bowl.
And honestly, a lot of the things I said about Chaz Surratt, like QB spy, blitzer, underneath coverage stuff, Tony Fields does that pretty well as well for West Virginia. I thought his role on third down, some raw stuff early downs, but a third down role, he's checking a lot of boxes for me.
Dane, when you go back to Hilliard, like the interception against Northwestern down in the red zone where he's one-on-one with the tight end was big time. And then him sniffing out the screen pass against Clemson down in the flat, defeating those blocks in space and making the TFL. 2 plays in coverage there that you're kind of pointing to say, yeah, this is what this guy can be. But as you alluded to, the medical history, that's going to be the big one to overcome for him.
Right. No doubt. Talent's not the question with him.
Yep. All right, let's get to the next one here. Best run defender. Ben, you kick this one off. Day 1, day 2, guy that's going to stack the box for us and be a big-time run player.
Well, this is a guy with great size, great triggering downhill, great lateral range, so he can cover the run in a variety of avenues. And that's Micah Parsons to a T, being 6'3", 245, which his size profile almost warrants putting him with the defensive ends and just calling him an off ball on first and second downs, which is really how he played in high school and his early career at Penn State, being a defensive end prospect. But the way he moves, the way he handles contact, whether it's getting off blocks at the second level, but the way he inserts into the line of scrimmage, into gaps, he is more than capable of banging with offensive linemen.
Yep.
Strong, balanced player. Really reminds me of the way Van Der Esch kind of played at Boise, just that he could get down into gaps and be able to hang with the big boys. So I really like Parsons. Obviously strength, but range in combination.
Kind of like a souped up Chaz Surratt, and that he's a bigger build, so he can do things a little bit differently. But impact pass rusher, coverage upside, I think is going to be an interesting player for sure moving forward. Dane, who's another guy, day one, day two, that fits the bill for a run player?
Well, I got to go with Nick Bolton, and for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, under instincts. I mean, his ability to see it and go. He can mirror runners laterally. He hits that extra gear through the hole and into contact, which is just so impressive. The last 2 years, he started every game, and he's averaged 9.2 tackles per game in the SEC, which is really, really impressive. And he's a smaller guy, so he's got that smaller margin for error. One false step, or if he's not, squared up, he doesn't have that length that's really going to bail him out. So he has to be, have extra attention to the way he plays. And even though he does play super fast, he's still controlled with how he works off blocks, how he, puts himself in position, how he attacks. Just a really, really impressive run player.
Dane, you feel like he's outside looking in at round one?
I think it just comes down to what you think he gives you in coverage.
Yeah.
If you think that he's going to continue to grow and be a reliable 3-down type of player, then he's going to get considered in the first round, no question. But I think that's where the question lies: is does he have the same type of instincts against the pass that he does versus the run? And is he going to be able to hold up in any situation? So I think there's probably a better chance he goes, in that 33 to 45 range than the 20 to 32 range. But, we're still talking about a really good player.
So Bolton, one of the best players in the SEC at the linebacker position. I'm going to go with two other guys here on day three that fit this, run defender category that also made plays in the SEC. Number one, KJ Britt from Auburn. A little bit squatty. He's kind of like Bolton in that standpoint. He's just not as explosive or twitchy as Bolton is, but this guy's instinctive. He's a captain, really physical. He's great playing through contact. I love him playing down close to the line of scrimmage. Really flashed to me live watching the on TV, the LSU game in 2019. I thought he was one of the best players on the field for that Auburn defense and really kept them in that game against the eventual champs. But injury-riddled year this year. He only played a couple games, but really tough physical kid downhill. I really like KJ Britt for that kind of role. And then another guy I just watched recently, and that's Ernest Jones from South Carolina. I think at the end of the day, both these guys are early down players only. Jones is just really good in traffic. I think he's got a really good knack for playing through traffic, playing through contact, defeating blocks, finding his way to the football. Has been an instinctive 2-year starter for South Carolina. I like what I've seen from Ernest Jones from the Gamecocks. All right, guys, let's go to our highest upside picks, and we're going to talk about some of the same kind of players here. But Dane, I'll let you kick things off. Who's your high upside pick, day one or day two?
This was easy for me. It's Micah Parsons. If he hits, if everything lines up the way it could, he's Bobby Wagner. He is a Hall of Fame type of player. He's got that potential. As a size, speed, strength athlete, he's outstanding. His reaction to movement, his combative mentality. He has what it takes to develop into a cornerstone defender for an NFL team. He needs to become a little more polished with his reads, with dropping into coverage, his spacing, things like that. Obviously, needs to prove he's a disciplined, mature player as well on and off the field. But the potential is there. If we're just talking high upside and what a guy could be, to me, it's Micah Parsons.
So I'm going to go with a player here that's going to be, probably late day two, if I were to guess. Then Dane, correct me if you think I'm wrong here. I'm going to go Baron Browning from Ohio State in that this guy's a height, weight, speed profile position or player at this position. I thought he had a good week at the Senior Bowl, only a 1-year starter for Ohio State. It was kind of a spot starter for them and even was banged up this year. So was in and out of the lineup. That's what allowed Hilliard to jump in as more of a starter this year. I think when you look at Browning, he could fit at the will. He could fit at Sam. He can match up against tight end. He can put his hand in the dirt against the tackle as a pass rusher. He could play stacks. He could do a lot of different things for you. It's about putting it all together. But when you look at the way that he moves at his size, I mean, he's really impressive. When you see him, he again just checks a lot of boxes from a physical standpoint. So he might end up falling to early day 3, but I'm going to say with his traits that you're looking at a potential day 2 pick there. So I will go with Baron Browning as my high upside guy on day 2. Ben, take us through yours. Who's your high upside pick for day 3?
Well, as much as I want to go with Anthony Heinz III at Texas A&M, just for his, obviously being a high recruit a couple years back and just never really produced on the field. So I think he's got more in the tank to develop. But I got to go with a redshirt sophomore. There's not many in the linebacking group. That's Cameron McGrone out of Michigan. He just played this past year in the Big Ten at 20 years old. After playing last year, a full-time starter as a true freshman at 19 years old, taking over that Devin Bush role. So he's got some inconsistent tape. He's also got some really wow tape. And he'll flash some range sideline to sideline. He'll flash some pass rush ability, a little raw in coverage, a little raw with play ID and instincts. But he's 20 years old, guys. I think he has a lot of good football ahead of him, a lot to still develop. And he came from a very NFL-style defense that Don Brown, implores out there in Michigan, or used to implore out there in Michigan. So he's a guy, just because he's a little young, a little raw, that makes his ceiling and his upside that much greater.
He really reminds me of Duke Riley when he was coming out of LSU, Dane.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The medicals are going to be huge for him. He's coming off a pretty serious knee injury, and he had one in high school too. So the knees need to check out. But if they do, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, his play speed is just ridiculous with the way he flies around the field. So hopefully he can stay healthy.
All right, so let's go to our sleepers here. And Ben, you're going to kick us off. And I know a guy that you just watched this weekend. He got a combine invite last week from Oklahoma State, the senior, Amen Ogbongbemiga. Take us through it. What'd you see from Amen on film?
Well, what I saw with his name is a guy that needs a nickname badly needs a nickname that rolls off the tongue a little bit easier, but is a really interesting player. And Oklahoma State, not really pumping out a lot of off-ball linebackers to the NFL. In fact, haven't had one drafted since 1995. So I'm predicting that he's going to break that streak. Really interesting player at 6'1", 235, redshirt junior, born in Nigeria, grew up in Houston, went to high school in Canada. So this guy's got a big story off the field, obviously all over the place, 2-year starter, team captain, special teams ace with over 500 snaps, solid range, good tackler, very calm, under controlled movements, almost a little slow to ID at times, but that means he doesn't take the cheese or ever out of control. A very disciplined player, can mirror and scrape laterally on the second level. Some good sub rushing and blitzing. I don't really know what to do with him on third down. I don't think he's great in coverage. I don't think he's a great blitzer, but early down stuff, run defense, underneath zones, range, tackling, really good player, productive player as well. And a guy that I just think needs a little bit more love in this category with a really interesting background and a couple of family members that have been through the program into the NFL, like Emmanuel Ogbah. His cousin as well. So really interesting player. I'm not sure if you guys watched him.
I have not. Dane, have you?
I have. I graded him as a guy that's going to stick because of special teams. He's a good player. I don't know that he's going to be more than a late round pick, but he's a guy that I think will make it further than probably some of the linebackers drafted in front of him. All
right, Dane, give us your sleeper here.
So I'm going with another underclassman, Isaiah Mcduffie out of Boston College. He's an active tone setter. I mean, the guy flies around. The aggressive motor is outstanding. He covers a ton of ground. He makes plays on both sidelines. He understands football geometry. He understands angles. He understands how to attack leverage. He's just a really productive player. The coaches love him. They talk about him as, the right kind of guy with his mentality and the way he plays. This past year, he missed most of 2019 with a knee injury. He comes back this past year and had 107 tackles in 11 games. So almost average double-digit tackles per game. Just a really, really active player who sometimes too active, needs to show a little bit better discipline, but all he knows is how to fly a route to make plays. So he's got a little, touch of insanity to him. But I think a guy that's going to, show out on special teams, provide some linebacker depth, and just be a solid pro.
Do you think like late day 3 we're looking at for McDuffie, or you think he could go earlier in day 3?
Somewhere probably 5th, 6th would be my guess.
Okay. All right. So I'll go to another junior declaration. And Ben, you mentioned him in the last segment. That's Anthony Heinz III from Texas A&M, 6'3", sub 230 pounds. He opted out this year, so he did not play. Was only a 1-year starter, but this was a former big-time recruit who, when I watch him, guys, and again, when you get to day 3, you're either going to have guys with instincts or guys with tools. And Heinz is definitely more in the tools category. He moves really, really well. He's really fluid. He's got sideline to sideline range. He's got some pop on contact. Look, with the limited reps, he's not the most instinctive, but I didn't see him as a guy that was a slow processor either. I thought that he sniffed out some screens. You could see him navigate through traffic a little bit. He reminded me a little bit of Kamu Grugier-Hill when Grugier-Hill first got to the Eagles, and he was a late day 3 pick out of Eastern Illinois. I know, a converted safety. I look at Heinz as kind of that same kind of build, that same kind of mover. Look, he's going to have to prove himself in terms of being able to be ready for the NFL game. Again, with limited experience, only 13 starts in his career, just over 100 tackles, just not a very productive player. He's got no production whatsoever in coverage. He's only been a blitzer. So a lot of projection here with Anthony Heinz. But when you get to day 3 and you start talking about, all right, well, who's got some traits? I think this kid's got some traits. So he's certainly a name I think you start keeping an eye on in the middle of day 3 in terms of coming off the board. Last category here, guys. Player comps. Dane, I'll kick this one off to you because I know you had one that you've been itching to unload on us.
Well, and there were a couple that really stood out to me, and hopefully I'm not taking any of yours, but Monty Rice, I thought him and he compared really favorably to Micah Kaiser.
Okay.
Tough Borland from Ohio State. We talked about the other 3 Ohio State linebackers. Got to get tough in here. Reminded me of Matakevich out of Temple.
That's the name I've got written down for him. Yep.
Yeah, still in the NFL. But the guy, the comparison to me that just hit me over the head, I think they're clones. Jamin Davis from Kentucky, you had talked about earlier. Him and Zach Cunningham, the linebacker at Vandy who went to the Texans. I think he was late 2nd round, I believe, maybe 3-4 years ago. I just think they're the same exact player with long, rangy players. Trust their eyes, play fast, quick to respond. The way that they can cover ground laterally, got a little bit of drop in them. I just think you're getting the exact same player. I think you're going to be drafted in similar ranges too. And I think they'd be similar NFL careers.
You said that to me before I had gotten a chance to watch them, and so that colored it a little bit for me. But dude, they are spitting images. I mean, like that comp is outstanding. I'm going to go with one that really hit me over the head last summer when I did this player, and that's Pete Werner from Ohio State. Ben talked about him earlier. Kind of one of those hybrid players. He played stacked. He played down the line of scrimmage. He played over the slot. Really, really reminds me of Matt Milano when Milano was coming out of Boston College. And I think when you look at the similar kinds of body types, we're going to see what the athletic profile looks like, but just watching on film, similar kinds of players that I think will go in similar part of the draft. Milano was an early day 3 selection. I think that's kind of where Werner will end up slotting. We'll see if he goes late day 2, but I think that Werner and Matt Milano, that really makes a lot of sense to me. Ben, what would be yours?
Well, we'll stay there in that Ohio State linebacking core. We'll go back to Baron Browning. And I'm going to compare him to a first-team All-Pro linebacker in 2019, second-team All-Pro linebacker in 2020, a guy that I don't think gets nearly enough attention in national circles, and that's Demario Davis down there with the New Orleans Saints, who was a 3rd-round pick in 2012. Demario was 6'2", 235, ran a blistering 4.49. Browning, 6'3", 240, similar height, weight. A lot of murmurs out there that Browning's going to be a darling tester around a low 4.5 at that size. And Davis going in the 3rd round. I could see, Browning kind of going right in that kind of ballpark, that kind of middle of the 3rd round tier, just before day 2 ends. And Demario Davis coming out of Arkansas State, I believe, has carved out a great career. 9 years, nearly 8,000 snaps played. And I'm glad he's been getting a little bit more recognition nationally with those All-Pro nods. But Baron Browning, really good player too.
Yeah, one of the more underrated players in the NFL, I would think, in Demario Davis. Well, guys, we've covered a lot of linebackers here, but we've got one more exercise to do. We're going to go on the clock. It's time now to pick some players for some teams.
On the Clock.
All right, guys. So as we do each and every week here on our On the Clock segment, we are going to pick 3 players for 3 random teams. And so I plugged in the randomizer, 3 different randomizers. I go to the same website and I do it 3 different times. And Dane, you're up first. You're picking for the Cincinnati Bengals in round 2. And you're going to give us a speed receiver. So, Dane, if you can outline us what you want at the position, I will play the role of the scouting department. Ben will play the role of the coaching staff, and we'll see if we can come together and find a player that fits.
Awesome. So, I think we feel good about Tyler Boyd in the slot. T. Higgins has emerged for us as a first down machine, but we need more vertical speed. John Ross, he's been a bust. I think my assistant made that pick. We're looking for players who can stretch out coverage and you just give defenses a legit deep threat that they have to account for. It's going to help open up things underneath. So let's target a speed receiver somewhere in day 2. What do you got?
So I was listening. I'm playing the role of the scouting staff. I was listening to a great podcast. It's called the Journey to the Draft podcast. And they have this segment called The Blueprint where they talk to somebody local that can speak, can speak on specific teams. And the very first one, they talked with Joe Goodberry, who knows this Cincinnati Bengals team very, very well. He's been following us very closely. And when he outlined the wide receiver position for us, he said, we factor in 3 different things: youth, breakout age, and production. And so when I look at day 2, the players that I personally think fit this bill for us as speed receivers in round 2, I look at the potential for guys like Kadarius Toney, Rondell Moore, Tutu Atwell, right? And I look at all 3 of those guys and I say, okay, all 3 of them potential to go round 1. But look, we're picking 38th overall. We're picking pretty high up there in round 2. I feel like we've got the ability to get one of these 3 guys. And if we don't, De'Ami Brown from North Carolina, not a bad, fallback plan there if we don't get one of those 3. That being said, if I'm going to look at all 3 of these guys in terms of Atwell, Rondell Moore, and Toney, the guy that I think fits in terms of those 3 items that we highlighted, youth, breakout age, and production, I got to go with Rondell Moore with what he did as a true freshman back in 2018. I think Atwell with what he did as well. He's been consistently productive. Toney, not as much. He took a little bit of time. He was a little bit of a slow burn. Took a little bit of time for him to reach that level of production. But if I'm looking at Rondell Moore and Tutu Atwell, I think those are 2 guys that really fit the mold of what we've done in recent memory.
Well, I really want to get Joe Burrow a reliable target. He needs a best friend in that offense. We need a chain mover on 3rd down. Someone that gets open quick, can maybe do some damage with the ball in their hands for the offense and be that vertical threat. So I like the Atwell. I like the Moore. I like the Toney. I want to know if Elijah Moore is maybe in this conversation of ballpark. Probably a little rich at this part of the draft for a Shi Smith or Amari Rodgers type. They're probably, more of a round 3, round 4 in there. But, considering we have Boyd, we have Higgins, I still like what Auden Tate provides for us in the red zone as a catch point guy. With AJ Green and John Ross gone, I need somebody to move the chains for us and somebody to catch a lot of footballs from Joe Burrow. He needs a friend out there. They're not always going to be accurate. So whoever you're picking here, Fran, for me, and Dane, I need someone where their hands are going to show up first and foremost for the quarterback.
So Dane, as a GM, a lot to kind of weigh there because obviously you need a little bit of the possession element as Ben highlighted, but you also want that game-breaking ability as well.
Yeah, that's tough because I don't, Rondell Moore is a good player, but I don't know that he showed us enough on tape about him winning deep and, being a true deep threat. Our defense is really going to be scared of him as a deep threat. And Tutu Atwell, he has that deep threat element, but does he have the reliability that you're looking for in terms of being, snap in, snap out? Getting open underneath and moving the chains. I don't know that he gives you that dynamic. So split the difference. What about Elijah Moore? I think he does give you a little bit more of that deep threat ability, but we know, his Ole Miss just force fed him the football underneath. So we know he can be a catch and create guy, has a great set of ball skills. So what do we think about Elijah Moore?
I think that makes sense. And that's a guy I probably should have had on my list. And in terms of the speed, I think, you can't place enough value on that. Obviously, we learned that the hard way with John Ross. Maybe we overvalued that a couple of years back in 2017. But this guy's got juice. We're talking early round 2, 38 overall, not 9 overall. I could get on board with using that kind of pick on that kind of a player.
Well, I was ready to go Tutu Atwell until our coaching staff said that they wanted someone just a little bit more reliable as a chain mover. So I think Elijah Moore fits that.
All right. So let's get to the next one here. And Ben, you're going to go second for us. You have the New Orleans Saints early day 3. So we're talking like round 4, round 5. Move tight end. What do you like here for us here?
Well, yeah, with Jared Cook and Josh Hill likely gone in free agency, just looking for a more athletic option at that tight end position. We took Adam Trautman out of Dayton in the 3rd round last year. He's clearly part of our future as that athletic profile, but we want some more depth on early day 3 here. So we want someone that can stretch the seam vertically, maybe be a yak threat. You can have an athletic profile in that raw skill set. We've gone to that well before, whether that was Dan Arnold at Wisconsin Plattsville, being a former receiver, or even Josh Hill, who I just mentioned we're probably going to lose in free agency, was a ho-hum kid at Idaho State that we bulked up and turned into a tight end. So don't feel like we need to go after the Power 5 through and through tight ends. You could have a little creativity with these projections, and considering we have Trautman in that role, I think there's some room for development and some room to grow. So if it's a bit of a project player, bit of an injury history player, or a small school, I think we're willing to kind of cut some corners if we need to.
All right. So Dane, you're playing the role of the scouting staff. Who are some players that kind of fit the bill from a value standpoint?
Yeah, and we're talking early day 3. So, guys like Brevin Jordan and Hunter Long, those guys are probably off the board for us. So we have to, do a little bit deeper of a dive here. And a player that really stood out to our staff, Kenny Yeboah out of Ole Miss. This is a player who lined up in line and detached in that Lane Kiffin spread scheme. He was a transfer from Temple, but I thought he settled in really quickly with his new team. So, a guy that is bright, he's motivated, but then he was also productive. Just have to throw on the Alabama tape facing that defense to see what he could give you. Might be a little bit limited as a blocker, but you're looking for a guy that can be a field stretcher, that can be productive before and after the catch. I think Yeboah might have just enough athleticism to what we're looking for early day 3.
So I, as the coaching staff representing Sean Payton and that entire group, I think that Yeboah makes plenty of sense, and he definitely has the field stretching element, the yards after catch element that we're looking for. If we do want to get a little bit deeper in terms of a raw profile, a developmental player, a couple of guys I think that are worth bringing up into the discussion. I think when you look at Kylan Granson from SMU, this is an undersized player who's a little bit of a hybrid skill set. And I think, when you look at what we've done with kind of these hybrid players who, maybe were seen as projects that people had to develop, I think Granson kind of fits into that mold. He's had some drops issues in the past, but, a little bit undersized, but he's got the ability to line up at a number of different spots and find ways to win as a pass catcher, even chip in a little bit as a lead blocker as well for our run game. But I'm envisioning a lot of different personnel groupings with him and being able to get a lot of different looks with him on the field. So Granson would be a developmental player I think would be interesting. Pro Wells from TCU basically was a glorified big slot for the Horned Frogs. But I think when you look at how we use Josh Hill early in his career, similar kind of body type, and then he grew into more of a dual threat inline player. But he was a big slot early. We remember we ran all those out and up routes. We were able to get him down the field. That was late stage Jimmy Graham when he was here with us in New Orleans. I feel like Pro Wells can do some of those same things as we continue to groom him as a pass or as a blocker as well. So Pro Wells would be another one. And then you mentioned Dan Arnold. Ben Skowronek is a wide receiver at Notre Dame that I feel could really make a really easy transition to the tight end spot as well. He's got field stretching ability. He can line up outside the numbers and win. He's got that hybrid skill set that we have worked with in the past. So I would say on top of Yeboah, I would throw in Kylan Granson, Pro Wells, and then Notre Dame's Ben Skowronek. Again, Northwestern transfer who played at Notre Dame this year and was productive for the Irish.
Dane, if I'm sitting here and I'm considering, Kenny Yeboah, I really like that pick there. I think Pro Wells is a really sneaky option here, early day 3. Where would you stack a Trey Mckitty among those two?
Probably he and Yeboah, I think those are the two guys that are competing to be the first senior tight end drafted. I think it comes down to Mckitty giving you a little bit more as a blocker, where I think Yeboah has got a little more juice, after the catch. And so I think it comes down to preference there. If we're looking for the better, more dynamic pass catcher, I think Yeboah's the pick. But if we want someone that's going to hold their own as a blocker, Mckitty, I think, would get the edge.
Okay, well, Yeboah, showing up to the Senior Bowl, nearly 215 pounds, obviously has the blocking profile. We're going to be running the ball with our young quarterback this year. A lot of play action stuff. I need guys that are kind of glass eaters in the trenches first. I'm going to go with Kenny Yeboah. I liked what he did at Temple, and then obviously a little bit more in the pass game at Ole Miss. I think he's a guy we can get some production out of right away.
I like it. All right, so Kenny Yeboah off the board there to the New Orleans Saints, early day 3. I will round us out here, and I'm picking for the Pittsburgh Steelers in round 3, and I'm going to look for a nickel corner. So what I'm looking for here, Mike Hilton is a free agent. He's been one of the best players for our defense for a long time. So there is potential here to start early, but the only way that you could play for us is if you are a tough, competitive player. You have to fit the AFC North. So I'm looking for that guy that's got an edge. We play a good mix of man and zone coverage, so you can be versatile from that side of it. We are a big single high team, though, so we'd like to be able to stay in nickel versus base. Again, going back to that competitiveness, we're really looking for a guy that brings a little bit of an edge to the position. We like guys from big schools. Big schools matter unless it's from the Midwest inside our little footprint here, where, me being Kevin Colbert, my son is the area scout for that area of the country. I trust his evaluations. So if we're inside that area, that's fine. But otherwise, we're looking Power 5. And athleticism is very, very important to us. We do not want stiffs out there on the field for us on defense. So we're looking for athletic guys for toughness. Round 3, slot corners. Ben, you as the scouting staff, paint the picture for us here. Who are we looking at?
Well, we got an absolute steal with Mike Hilton at Ole Miss as an undrafted free agent in 2016 and great production. Hate to see him go. There's some guys that fit his profile, but I think they're a little more day 3 guys. The Trey Browns, Ambry Thomas, even a Jamar Johnson at Indiana. I think this is more of a day 3 guy. So I'm looking at Elijah Molden at University of Washington. Javon Holland has a little more size out of Oregon, closer to 200 pounds. I think a little bit of a better run defender, better of an early down player. I'm really intrigued with Ardarius Washington, who reminds me a lot of Mike Hilton out of Ole Miss. Just lacks a lot of size, but plays bigger, tough guy, good in run support, can cover the slot, can play the back end if you need to. We have Mike Hilton wear a lot of different roles, so I'd hate to find someone that's kind of a through and through slot or a through and through half field safety. So I like Ardarius's kind of, versatile skill set. The big question is his size. But when you looked at Mike Hilton, I feel like that's why he didn't get drafted. So I would hate, to see a guy like this get passed over and we watch him be a star with somebody else.
I think you brought up some really good names there. Dane, as the coaching staff, who do you like those names, or is there somebody you like more?
Well, my ears perked up when I heard Elijah Molden. Watching some tape on Molden, I was sold pretty quickly with what he could offer, his toughness, his instincts. If we're looking for specifically a nickel corner, I think he fits what we do and fits the profile. One other name I want to throw out there, and this is, I know it kind of goes against the grain with what we usually do. We stick to Power 5 teams and, some of the more higher profile programs, but he used to play at one. So maybe that counts. I'm talking about Aaron Robinson over at UCF. He started at Alabama before he went to the Group of 5 level. But he could give us that inside outside versatility, really tough in the nickel. So I think he's a name we need to consider as well.
I'll tell you what, Ben, you sold me on Elijah Molden, and I think that makes a lot of sense there. Is there any concern, guys, that he is not there for us in round 3? I guess Aaron Robinson as well. Is there any concern that, we're kind of left not having our guy, or do we need to move?
Well, at the moment, this third-round pick is 88th overall, so it's towards the end of that day 2, towards the end of round 3. I currently have Elijah Molden as a top 50 player. So I think if he's sitting there at early round 3, you trade up and go get him. I would be shocked to see him fall to 88. So we may need to start coming up with some contingency plans if Molden's not there. So looking at the Aaron Robinsons of the world, or that next kind of tier down, is probably going to be needed.
Yeah, because I agree. Elijah Bolton's a top 50 player in this draft. I don't know. Shakur Brown is someone that I think could fit what we do. I don't know if Asante Samuel does anything for our scouting staff for us. I don't know if that might be a fit, but names worth considering in the third.
If you feel like there's a slider in this group, if if Sean Wade is sitting there at 88, if one of these Georgia corners at all of great toughness sitting there at 88. Fran, how do you feel about maybe going and get one of those guys?
Yeah, does Mark Webb, fill that need for us? Is he a guy that we feel like could come in and kind of make that transition?
I was even thinking like a DJ Daniel. He's so tough. I have some questions about his technique and speed. He's so tough. I feel like he could survive in the nickel for us.
Yeah, I would like
round 3 might be rich.
Yeah, I don't like Mark Webb that early, but DJ Daniel, I think that's. That he'd be interesting there. I really liked what I saw from him, even though his reps this year were limited.
All right. So after thinking it over, I think we go in with the idea that if Elijah Molden or Aaron Robinson are within striking distance and we can strike up a deal to be able to move up and get one of those guys, feel great about that. And then if not, I think our Darius Washington is a safe fallback plan for us as a guy that's athletic. He's tough. He's versatile. A little bit of a transition because he'll be playing more pure slot as opposed to safety. But I think that he fits what we are from a philosophical standpoint, from a toughness standpoint. So what do you think, guys? Another good exercise. 3 good discussions there for 3 different teams, man.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to start doing mock drafts up to this point so we know who was taken. I mean, I'm picking tight ends for the Saints. I want to know who our quarterback is. Who do we take in round 1? What's our team looking like?
Maybe
let's just extend the pod 5 hours and, Yeah,
we'll do a live 7-round mock every week to make sure we know the pecking order, who's available, where the trades were.
I mean, we could go and do the mock draft simulator and just run it for this situation, but
then we got to ask you, hey, is this guy available? Hold on.
Yeah, we'll workshop it. We'll workshop it. But it was another fun conversation, guys. As always, this has been great. Let's do a little bit more work here on a team-centric part of this podcast. We're now going to welcome in Brent Sobleski to talk about the Cleveland Browns. It's time for the Blueprint.
All 32 teams are always under construction. How are they being built? Let's check out the blueprint.
All right, well, joining us this week here on the Blueprint is a guy who knows this Cleveland Browns team inside and out. That's Brent Sobleski. Brent, thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
No, thank you for having me. As always, I had to make sure I make a little bit of time so that we can discuss the NFL draft, the Cleveland Browns, and eventually get to WandaVision, because that's really what's important today.
Yeah, no question. We know that that's on the forefront of everybody's minds as we go into the weekend here. Let's go into the first question here. Obviously, look, we've only had just 1 year under Andrew Berry, the new general manager with the Cleveland Browns, but he does have some history there. He was there in Cleveland before, and you've got a pretty decent handle on what the thought process is with him, that front office, the NFL draft, team building. With that in mind, are there just a couple of trends? We'll go 1, 2, 3 here that stand out to you, looking at the Cleveland, at the Cleveland Browns' recent draft history that you think people should just kind of keep at the forefront of their mind when they're putting together a mock draft? What would be the first one that sticks out to you?
Well, I'll say it this way, because obviously, as you stated, it's only been a year, so we have to see how this organizational setup is going to continue to work together, unlike previous Browns regimes, which were not aligned to be nice. The 2 major ones you could take away from the first draft class: 1, age matters. Okay, so when you look at all the selections a year ago, only one of them is 23 years old right now. So It shows you that these guys they prefer underclassmen. They want to see them produce at an early age, because as we know, the stats tend to tell you that if a player is more productive earlier in his collegiate career, he has a higher likelihood of also producing at the NFL level once he's in the league. You look at, for example, Jedrick Wills and Jacob Phillips, they're still only 21 years old. So there's a heavy emphasis on age and when they were able to break out at the collegiate level. Second of all, division matters. And by division, I mean conference. So look at where their first, 4 draft picks last year were from the SEC. They know they played at a high level. They did so against the best competition available, and that it should translate overall. I know one of the things you were going to ask me, so I'll just jump ahead for a second. One of those programs in the SEC, LSU, 2 draft picks right off the bat for the Cleveland Browns last year under Andrew Berry. So looking at that way, I put a heavy emphasis on underclassmen, young underclassmen specifically, and then what programs did they perform well in, because we want to know how they competed against the best competition overall.
Yeah. And again, like that's what's interesting to me is like looking at this whole process. All of these guys that are general managers, all these guys that are put in these positions, they've been working their whole lives to get to this. And there are going to be certain aspects of their background that lead to these decisions. You know, hey, look, if we want to try and up our probability of finding good players, we're only going to take young guys because we feel like we can get the most upside out of them. Or, hey, we're only going to take guys from big conferences. There's always going to be outliers, but I always like trying to get into the root of what is it exactly that these guys prefer one thing over another. Is there anything else that kind of stands out to you, a third quality for people to keep in mind?
Well, the other thing I'll bring up is position versatility. Because if we're looking at today's game, the NFL today is so much about matchups. And if you can have those quote unquote positionless players, then they have added value. So even if in a situation where the 10th overall pick, they had to go offensive tackle last year. Well, Jedrick Wills, his entire career, going back to high school, not just Alabama, but high school, only playing right tackle. They were comfortable moving him to left tackle. You look at Grant Delpit in the second round, a guy that they wanted to bring in and play a little rover, play a little free safety, play strong safety, guys that can do multiple things. Even deeper in the draft, you go from a Harrison Bryant, who is, yes, a tight end, but he plays inline. He plays H-back. He can play from the slot. In fact, he led all collegiate tight ends in slot receiving yardage in 2019. And so when you have these type of players that can do multiple things, it really places an emphasis on how you can be more flexible and multiple within your schemes. And that's something that's going to be huge for Cleveland this year specifically, especially on the defensive side of the ball, because of not only lack of talent in certain positions, but also due to injuries, they were really pigeonholed into certain schemes that allowed them to stay within games without fully utilizing what Joe Woods wanted to do on that side of the ball.
Yeah, that's why there are a few players that kind of make sense to me for that team, but we'll get into that a little bit later in the conversation. You mentioned LSU. They had 2 picks from the Bayou Bengals last year during their national championship run. Were there any other schools that when you look at the staff, when you look at the front office, that you're like, this is a school certainly to keep in mind when you're talking about mock drafts here?
I don't have any that I believe they particularly adhere to because of, what I always call the ties to bind in the NFL, right? Where you have a history somewhere, there's always that inkling to want to go towards that program because you trust it. And I understand that completely. It's ironic because the way you look at it is I mentioned how they like Power 5 prospects. And yet Andrew Berry's an Ivy League product, Kevin Stefanski's an Ivy League product. Yep. And so I don't necessarily lean towards them looking in certain places, just the fact that they fit the profile that we were previously discussing. So if there is somewhere like in LSU, for an example, Jabril Cox playing linebacker, his ability to drop in the coverage, that's a major need for this organization, that would make sense. But looking at it overall, I don't believe it's really specific in that regard, yet you can see where there's certain type of programs that they will tend to lean toward more so than others. And,
when you start getting into the Ivies, hey, look, if they're going to take long shots on a guy like Jesper Horsted from Princeton, guys that they can try and develop, that door is always open there. Speaking about this Cleveland Browns team going into this offseason, we're talking about this, early March now before free agency hits. What do you see as the biggest needs, the 3 biggest needs for this team going into the year?
Okay, so 1 defense, 2 defense, 3 defense. And if I didn't mention it, defense. And so the problem with what occurred a year ago, first of all, they had the worst linebacker unit in the NFL. But that's more of an organizational philosophy, more so than just being devoid of talent and not capable of upgrading. I think that's not a position that they're going to immediately address. They will address in some manner, whether it be free agency or the draft, but not to the level that people expect with a first round pick or a gigantic offseason signing. It's possible, but I think when they look at it, if we go back a few years, and I give this total credit to ESPN Seth Wickersham on this one, when we had that falling out within Paul DePodesta and Hugh Jackson and all that just became a huge quagmire for the organization, Wickersham did a wonderful story about the divide within the analytics-based decision makers in the organization and the old school coaching and general manager. And so one of the things he had access to that to me is very pertinent to look at consistently is Paul DePodesta's guardrails. And I'm sure you've seen these, Fran, online, to really keep in line with how they want to proceed, how they view roster building and just organizational setup. And so one of them is they have right on there what positions they value most. Now, in this case, they're very much your typical positions when we consider the premiums with quarterback, tackle, pass rusher, cornerback. Then that's outright listed on their guardrails. Second of all, and I think it's important to keep in mind is, and I quote, keep in mind positional scarcity. And so when you're in a drafting position, you know that you're going to be able to get a quality wide receiver, a quality linebacker, running back later in the process. But once those runs start earlier in the draft, when you're talking about those premium positions, you have to understand that the scarcity of that position what changes dramatically once you get into the later rounds. You want to get those high-end talents. And so I look at defensive end opposite Myles Garrett. I look at cornerback opposite Denzel Ward. You're looking at guys that can step in and immediately contribute at one of those high profile positions and create the type of impact they need because they didn't get last year, because last year Greedy Williams was out all season with a nerve issue in his shoulder, which he has been cleared as of yesterday. But at the same time, how much can you rely on that? Nerve damage you have to be very careful with. Defensive end Olivier Vernon really showed well and played well at the second half of last season. Then he blows and tears his Achilles tendon in week 17. He's a free agent. Even if you re-sign him, what are you getting out of him? So looking at those specifically, that's where I believe they're going to go hard after in both free agency and the draft and trying to improve that defense as much as possible to complement one of the better offenses in the league.
So like you mentioned the positional scarcity aspect of it. And that's always the argument for people taking a running back early, that whole discussion. You feel like this is an organization where those kinds of rules, those kinds of guardrails, as you put it, they'll probably likely stick to that kind of rubric, right?
Absolutely. Unless I'm completely misreading it, because what we saw a year ago with the linebacker position, they did not invest much at all. And we knew it could be a question mark. Yes, they had drafted Sione Takitaki and Mac Wilson, very young players, but then you only basically add BJ Goodson on a 1-year deal and a Malcolm Smith on a 1-year deal. Solid veterans, good leaders, but they're limited in what they bring to that offense. And so when you look at that track record, at least within the first year, linebacker in particular wasn't something that they emphasized. And yes, they could add to the position, and there's going to be multiple guys we can discuss here in a bit that I think are really interesting to potentially work into the scheme. But I don't think when we continually see these mock drafts with like a Zaven Collins in there or a Nick Bolton as examples, that they don't quite fit the philosophy the team has and how they want to actually build their roster by placing their biggest investments in those key positions.
Yep, I think that's certainly something to keep in mind for that team, for people that are putting together the mock draft. Well, before we get there, everyone always talks about need versus best player available. How do you view that Andrew Berry and his crew? How do you think that they view that going into this draft?
Well, let me say this from a personal standpoint. There's no such thing as best player available.
That's right. Yep.
And because there's 32 different teams working off 32 completely different draft boards. There's not one homogenous draft board that every team looks at and says, hey, next guy up. It doesn't work that way. We love guys like Mel Kiper and Mike Mayock. Well, when he was for NFL Network, and Tom McShay and Matt Miller and Tony Pauline and all those guys that do great work. But those draft boards mean nothing compared to what's actually in the war rooms. And so to me, looking at it, yes, I do believe they adhere to best player available based on what they have on the board. And so they'll obviously be slanted towards certain position values, so needs. And all of this works or factored into the equation when they're evaluating the entire draft class. And another thing to bring up, Fran, is, and I'm sure you spoke about this, is, these draft boards aren't necessarily one-on-one, 1 to 400. They tend to whittle them down to about 150 prospects. So they're not looking at the same amount of guys as us. And 3, there's also vertical and horizontal boards when you look at overall drafting and then what position specific. So all these things you have to take into account when looking at what the teams are doing. And long story short, to me, it just means that they are going to adhere to their evaluations and stay strictly to them based on what they've set up from an individual standpoint.
So I think that was perfectly well said, especially talking about the different kinds of boards that teams work off of. All right, so let's talk turkey here. Let's get into some of these players that you feel definitely fit. We'll get into the guy you mentioned, a couple, the linebackers. Don't pencil those guys in. Is there a guy or two that you're looking at that are is being mocked to the Browns right now? They're like, yeah, this makes sense given what we know about the organizational value.
Well, the two that pop off the screen to me anytime you look at rating or rankings, Georgia's Aziz Ogilari, if he's available, because I know that's someone that has highly valued because of his pass rush capabilities, even though he wasn't essentially a full-time player at Georgia. Again, fits the profile, 20 years old, edge rusher, fits a need, comes from a pipeline program in Georgia. So considering how much they want to invest opposite Myles Garrett after going strong after Jadeveon Clowney last offseason, J.J. Watt this offseason, that's certainly a position of need that I think they'll prioritize. Another one, depending on availability, South Carolina's J.C. Horn, great physical cornerback, highly competitive, someone you could put opposite Denzel Ward, maybe play him outside, move Ward over the slot a little bit more, not basically change that defense from what essentially boiled down to a cover 4 heavy scheme to really basically create that bend don't but break, approach and allow them to do more with what Joe Woods wants to do, which has a lot of influences from that Seattle scheme, that was famous or still famous after the Legion of Boom. Again, profile, 21 years old, by South Carolina, premium position. So those are the ones that immediately pop to mind. I know one that's been mocked to them quite regularly that is interesting to me because of positional designation is Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah.
Sure. Yep.
Everyone will say, well, he's a linebacker. Well, this is absolutely true in title.
Right. Yep.
He played more snaps from the slot than he did any other position last year. He's basically a overglorified hang defender that you could put at safety, slot, linebacker, move him all the defensive chess piece. And I liken his game similar to what we saw Jabril Peppers a few years ago.
No question.
And so to me, if you take a player like that, he makes sense, even though he doesn't quite fit, position scarcity or just overall need. But because of his versatility, he allows you to do more defensively.
Remind me of the timeline. Was DePodesta there when they selected Jabril Peppers, or was that a different front office?
No, that was been the very start of what they were doing.
Got it.
So the value was there then, even though, and I will say this, at that time, so a lot of people go back and, Cleveland passed on Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson that year.
Right.
Well, first of all, Myles Garrett was going number 1 overall. So no one can go back in hindsight and say Patrick Mahomes was going to go number 1 because that really wasn't the discussion at the time. 2, Kansas City did a great job jumping ahead, not only Cleveland, but New Orleans were both seriously considering Mahomes. And 3, once Cleveland was at number 12 and Watson was there, the feeling within the organization wasn't that they were going to select the quarterback. They wanted Malik Hooker. And they traded out with the assumption that they were going to land Jabril Peppers, which is what ultimately happened. So that some of that's still in play there, right? That even though traditional linebacker aren't premium positions, there's still value there based on skill set and how they can improve your overall scheme.
That's an interesting guy, because I actually have Jabril Peppers written down as a comp on Owusu-Koramoah. I didn't even make the connection with the Browns. That actually is really, really intriguing to me. All right, so opposite side of the coin, you mentioned Nick Bolton, Zaven Collins, any other kind of off-ball backers. Is there anything else that you just doesn't really make sense from what you've seen in terms of mock drafts for Cleveland?
The one I think is really interesting, and it's not necessarily that they won't go that way, because I think they do value vertical speed, big, chunk capabilities within the offense, wide receiver, and simply because, and I bring that up because long-term, what are you doing at the position? And are you going to invest early in it? So if you look at Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry, their salary cap charge combined this year is $30.55 million. Either you're going to have to restructure this offseason, eat that money this year, and potentially move on at some point in the relative future. So I think if you're looking at a position that may be a surprise or kind of is off the board, that where you're not expected to, even though it doesn't fit the discussion we're talking about, it's certainly wide receiver. I think to me, that is one of those things where we saw without Odell Beckham that they really lacked that vertical threat to open up the offense. So while Baker Mayfield was playing very, very well without him in the lineup, once you got to Kansas City and in the postseason, that they were able to restrict the offensive playing field, and Cleveland didn't have the capabilities to create separation and really make Kansas City pay. And if they could have done that, I could have easily seen them escaping with a victory, and otherwise it went the opposite direction.
Yeah, it's that'll certainly be something interesting to keep an eye on. I guess just parting thoughts here, Brent. Just final advice for anybody that's making a mock draft and they're picking for the Browns.
It's one of those ones. Just beat into your head. Defense. I'll say it again because I know it's simplistic, but when you have stars on offense at potentially quarterback, definitely running back, certainly wide receiver, two-time Pro Bowler at tight end and Austin Hooper plus more, and the best offensive line of football, there's really no reason to address any other position on that side of the ball that early in the process. So I look defense wholeheartedly, except for I'm going to be stubborn and say it's not going to be a true linebacker. I don't believe that's going to be the case. I do seriously believe that Andrew Berry, one of the things I didn't mention that should be brought up, when he needed that offensive line help last year, he went all in. He went on and signed Jack Conklin, the top offensive lineman on the market, then doubled back and picked Jedrick Wills 10th overall. So if there's a position like cornerback or defensive end that they address in free agency, don't think it's off the board.
Love that.
It could very well be addressed again.
That's great. That's actually a great nugget to file away for sure. Well, Brent, dude, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll talk to you soon, man. Hope to see you soon.
Absolutely, man. You do the same. Everyone listening, stay safe and just enjoy what's going to be another wild and wacky NFL offseason.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Well, great stuff there from Brent. Hope you guys enjoyed that interview. I've been loving our Blueprint series every single week, and I know it's going to help out everybody that's looking to put together a mock draft as we get closer and closer to April's NFL draft. Now, let's get to a trio of questions. And again, the best way to reach us with your question, whether it's about a prospect or player rankings or a mock draft, whatever it is, you jump onto our Apple Podcast page, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Let's start things off here with Treasy R, who left a 5-star review saying, "Hey, Fran, longtime listener, first-time reviewer. I'm firmly of the belief that outside corner is one of the biggest holes in the roster, and that if Jamar Chase is gone at 6, I'm all in on a top corner or a slight trade down to pick up more selections. That being said, who are some bigger framed day 2 guys that intrigue you out wide?" So I think when you look at the outside corner spot, I think there are a lot of really intriguing names. And I think ultimately when you look at what this scheme could look like, that's what it kind of makes it a little bit murky. Because I think when you look at especially defense in the back 7, so much of it comes to how you're looking to play defensively. Are you going to be a heavy man team? Are you going to be a heavy zone team, one way or the other? Are you going to play a mix of both? How much does your coaching staff prioritize competitiveness versus athleticism versus instincts? That's all those conversations. That's what the team has been having. The Eagles I was speaking to have been having these conversations behind closed doors really over the last few weeks, and they're going to continue to kind of have that because you need to be able to give Howie Roseman and the personnel staff, kind of recalibrate what does this staff need? What does this defense need? But I think when you look at potential outside corners that are going to be in that discussion, whether it's late round 1 or even getting into day 2, one guy we saw down at the Senior Bowl, which I'm not going to get too deep into because we broke him down so often when we were down there, is that Ifeatu Melifonwu, 6'3", 212-pound corner. He's a redshirt junior. His older brother, Obi, was a second-round pick of the Raiders a few years back. But I think Ifeatu is a much better player, to be honest. I think he's a really instinctive player. He's got good ball skills. He's been very productive. We talked about the length, but his ability to be, whether it's in zone coverage or man coverage, I think he reads routes really well. He's instinctive and is always around the football. Of those Syracuse DBs, he's the guy that really kind of impresses me with his overall skill set. So I really like Melifonwu. I think you can look at Aaron Robinson from Central Florida, who's a little bit smaller. He's just under 6 foot, 190 pounds, but he's got that inside-outside versatility. I really love his competitiveness. You can take a look at Greg Newsome from Northwestern, who right now is listed 6'1", 190. That's what he's listed by with Northwestern. We'll see what his official measurement is at the Pro Day. But I think when you talk about Greg Newsome, this is a player who's, number one, very instinctive, whether it's man, zone, whatever it is. This is a guy that has the ability to find his way around the football, and he doesn't panic downfield. I really love that. He's got really good instincts, whether it's man or zone, and he can make plays on the football. We'll see what the athleticism level is. Apparently, he's going to test well. I'm going to be interested to see how he ultimately runs and what he looks like in the shuttles. I think the athleticism looks pretty good on tape. I wouldn't say it's like top shelf, so I'm interested to see ultimately how he tests. Some people are really excited about Eric Stokes. Keith Taylor from Washington is a player that has caught some eyes, especially down to the Senior Bowl. He had a good week down there. Kelvin Joseph from Kentucky is a redshirt sophomore, 6'1", under 200 pounds, but he is a top-end athlete, explosive, has the physical tools, but still some areas that he'd like to get better at. We talked about him last week with Eric Crocker, which, by the way, if you have not, go back and check out that conversation I had with Croc late last week. We talked a lot about some of these top corners, but I would say those would be the corners. When you get to day two, you could throw in like a Tyson Campbell from Georgia if he's still there. Paulson Adebo from Stanford. I think he would be a really good fit in a zone-heavy scheme because of his awareness and his ball skills. There's a bunch of really interesting corners. And like I said, I think that when you look at that position, it can get really scheme-specific. So, Treasy, good question there to kick us off here. Let's go to the next one here. Do Sennett left a 5-star review saying, great show, Fran. Who do you guys think is the one guy other than Trevor Lawrence who could be a no-brainer if he was there at 6 overall? Is it Zach Wilson? Is it Jamar Chase? Keep up the great work and tell Ben, go Dragons. I will make sure I pass that along to Ben. Ben's always great, thankful to hear from anybody that has some love for his Drexel Dragons. To me, honestly, and this is the way I look at it, I don't think there's anybody in any draft that's a no-brainer. I think all these guys, there's a certain amount of development, not just on field, but off field, that really just kind of makes it a murky projection. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you anybody, whether it's Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck, anyone is going to be, this guy's a surefire, 100% he is going to hit. That is really, really tough to say. I mean, one of the best ones that I could think of from earlier, in my career covering the NFL draft, it would have been the late 2000s. Aaron Curry from Wake Forest was viewed as the safest player. I mean, you couldn't miss on Aaron Curry. He went to the top 5. He's an off-ball linebacker. And he flamed out relatively quickly, right? And you can go down there. There's example after example after example of guys that are being talked about as this guy's safe or that guy's safe, and he does not work out. It's a very as the saying goes, it's an inexact science. Now, you can start saying, all right, well, who are the top prospects? Who are the guys that have a good ability to be able to make that transition? And to me, this is something we talked about in regards to the Eagles' last draft class. So back in 2020, just under a year ago, when you're going to bet on high-end traits with high-end character, guys that are going to do all the right things off the field, and you have the feeling that they have that work ethic, they've got that it factor, along with the athletic upside, and that seemed to be what they were trending toward last year. They took guys that ran well, but also had good track records off the field, right? How many guys did we talk about were team captains, or the coaches raved about them in interviews and just kind of spoke to who they were as people, but then they also tested well. So it gave you an idea, okay, here's their ceiling, and they also have a floor that is also very high as well. So, I think when you start looking at who are the guys that kind of fit that, I feel like that's why a lot of people really like Devontae Smith, right, from Alabama. Jamar Chase, same deal. I think you look at Patrick Surtain, you feel like, all right, he's got the right wiring to make it in the NFL, and that's why a lot of people like guys that have those NFL bloodlines that were around the game from the moment they were born, and have always been around it. There's a bunch of guys you can list. I don't know if I would put them in any order, but those are the conversations that are happening as people are trying to stack their big board, their vertical board. Is, all right, well, who do we feel best about in terms of being able to make that transition, especially for our team, for our locker room, for our roster and our depth chart, and that's why it's going to be different from team to team, case to case. So, great question there to round us out. We're going to go now to our last one, which is going to be about a mock draft, and it's going to be Bert2349, who left us a mock draft saying, one of the best podcasts out there, love the detail and the breakdown from so many different players. Can you break down this mock draft and how they would fit in the projected new scheme and team? Assuming this is for the Eagles. I've gotten these players in multiple mock draft simulations, so even though I'm not counting on them being available when I got them, I am hopeful. So let's kick things off. First one, 6th overall, LSU wide receiver, Jamar Chase. And I don't know that there's too much more to be said about Jamar Chase. He's a great player. He's one of the better talents, regardless of position in this draft, for sure. I love him, his ability to win at X, at Z, it's in the slot, automatic at the catch point. He's really physical from snap to finish. I think that he fits, the mindset of a lot of teams want to be offensively. And if you want to play bully ball, if you want to be a physical team, he certainly fits that. And also, he's a playmaker at the receiver position. Again, what he did in that LSU offense in 2019 on their way to the national title, I think speaks volumes for the kind of player he can be. And again, just doing it as a 19-year-old last fall, in fall of 2019. So Jamar Chase, really, really intriguing player. You go to round 2, Jalen Phillips, the pass rusher from Miami. We just had Greg Cosell on late last week. He said Phillips was his favorite pass rusher on film. He was the former #1 recruit, regardless of position, coming out of high school, goes to UCLA, has to leave the Bruins due to, I think that he had to medically retire due to some injuries that he was facing. I know he's had a concussion history, so you got to work through that. In theory, that's probably why he falls to round 2 in any kind of scenario. But this is a long-limbed rusher who can win in a couple different ways. His highs are really, really high. To me, it's going to be a matter of consistency. Now, he did get better as the year went on this past year, and this was his first year as a starter. So you're kind of banking on his best football continuing to be ahead of him. You just got to work off, you have to work through all that other stuff that's away from the field, from the medical side of things. There are round 3, Georgia corner, Eric Stokes. I brought him up earlier in this segment. This is a height, weight, speed athlete at the cornerback position. He went and he tested at one of these more recent combines, sub 4.3. So you're talking about elite speed. He's got size and length. He can find the ball down the field. He shows flashes of being able to do that. I think he's got solid ability against the run. So I think in terms of teams that are looking for a press man corner, Eric Stokes is probably one of the more intriguing players in this class. I personally would be surprised if he fell to round 3, because typically guys that have that height, weight, speed at corner, unless there's some other issue there, they're not going to fall that late. So I'm interested to see where Eric Stokes ultimately goes in this draft. Let's go another 3rd-round pick. Pete Werner from Ohio State, the linebacker. We talked about him earlier in the show. Very versatile player. Gave them a ton of flexibility for the Buckeyes on the back end of that defense. He's tough. He's instinctive. He's been a 3-year starter. He's been a captain. Checks a lot of boxes. I'm interested to see ultimately how big he is. And again, we talked about him earlier. I don't think we need to dive too deep, but late round 3, I think that makes sense in terms of a value standpoint. Round 5, Kentucky center Jedrick Jackson. I think one of the more underrated players at the position in this class. Went down to the Senior Bowl. He just checks boxes. He's a little bit on the smaller side. He's not a great athlete. He's not the biggest or most powerful, but this is a guy who's technically sound. He's a smart player. He's a tough player. He's been a long-time starter. You could do a lot worse than Jedrick Jackson for sure on the interior offensive line. For the 2nd, 5th-round pick, this is a guy that's after my own heart. I listed him as my sleeper at the safety spot last week when we did our safety preview. That's Texas's Caden Stern. Now, he's in a 3-year starter. He was a little bit banged up in 2019, but you saw him back as a full-time starter this past year, playing in the post. He can play a little bit in the slot, but I think he's a really reliable free safety who can come down. He can run the alley really well as a run defender, but he also shows off that range to make plays from sideline to sideline. So Caden Stern's in round 5. I love a couple 6th-round picks here. One who's a junior, Tamarian Terry, big, long strider at wide receiver. He's from Florida State. Only played half the year this year, ended up opting out halfway through the season, but was one of the best big play threats in college football a year ago. You could see his ability to get down the field. He's not super explosive, but again, long strider, deceptive speed for a guy that big. And then Taryn Jackson, the pass rusher from Coastal Carolina. He's got some positional flexibility with the ability to kick inside, but we had his coach on earlier this offseason getting ready for the Senior Bowl, and you could hear just him talk about Taryn Jackson. He's number one, he's been very, very productive, but he's going to do everything right off the field. So everybody's going to get, anybody who gets him is going to get a good player, in the locker room and then also on the field as well. And then round 7, Keith Taylor, another player we talked about earlier, oversized corner from Washington. He's big, he's long, he's physical. I thought he had a good week. The corners overall struggled in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, but I thought Keith Taylor probably had one of the better weeks at the cornerback spot. And then he showed off in the game. I thought he had a really good Senior Bowl game as well. But he's started for a couple of years for Washington, who consistently puts defensive backs into the NFL. I think he projects well as an outside corner, I should say. So great question there for the mock draft. All you guys, great questions to round out this show. Thanks so much for everybody who has thrown us your support over on our Apple Podcast page. Thanks to everybody for listening in here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll be back a little bit later this week. We've got Greg Cosell. We've got another fun guest as well. Ben Fennell and I will be breaking down another mock draft. Stay tuned right here on this channel, right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
In just over 3 years, Eagle's Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.